This is the Marketing for Learning podcast, the only podcast in the world that's guaranteed to increase your knowledge, skills, and capabilities when it comes to marketing for learning. Plus, there's a gratuitous amount of pineapples. You're welcome. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Marketing for Learning podcast. I'm Ashley Hinchcliffe and I have a really exciting episode for you guys today. I am joined by two folks who are living on the other side of the world, all the way over in Australia. So thanks first of all for joining at a very uncivil hour for yourselves and a rather relatively okay one for me. I'm joined by Mark Eggers and Tom Bailey, and today we're going to be talking and building on the previous episode that I did with Giles around the attention economy and the impact that it's having on our learning functions, the way we produce and create content, and of course our employee engagement as well. So before I go any further, gents, lovely to meet you. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Ashley. Great to be here.
Mark, would you care to give us a little bit of an overview? Who are you? Where are you from? What's your name? What you on?
No worries. Yeah, so my name's Mark Eggers. I'm one of the co-founders of Yarno. We're a micro-learning platform that uses gamification to help engage learners and help the knowledge stick. And basically what we do is a quiz-first platform that essentially does a daily quiz, 3 questions a day, done in 3 minutes, and you get points and rewards and things like badges, and there's a league table or a leaderboard, which sort of encourages learners to get in there and compete against their peers and beat their boss, or a store versus store challenge, things like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I'll dig into that a bit more. Already have some questions. And Tom, hey, nice to meet you.
Hey.
Nice to chat to you again, actually.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks for having us on the podcast. My name's Tom Bailey. I am the head of learning at a company called OFX here in Australia. I'm also the host of the Rogue L&D podcast that we have here, and somehow I became the L&D Professional of the Year for 2025. Still holding on to it because they haven't had a new person yet. As with a lot of people in our wonderful L&D industry, I actually come from sales and marketing, so in the FMCG sector. So and we will dig into marketing a lot, I'm sure, and the importance of it, and it's the synergies between the two. So looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so you guys are close. You've worked collaboratively together with Tom as Mark's customer and client, and now I gather you're relatively good friends, given that this is the third time you've seen one another today. So hopefully we can have a really natural conversation. So obviously my first question is really around the Australian market and what's going on there, because obviously the UK has its own thing. Europe, we're in a little bit of an ecosphere, and I see a difference, especially in NORAM, in Northern America. What's it like over there? What's the maturity level of L&D, would you say?
Well, I think maybe Tom might be best suited for this one, given you've worked in both markets.
Yeah.
I'm Australian only at the moment, so what do you think?
Sure.
Tom?
I'd probably say ANZ, so Australia and New Zealand as a combined two markets, but I guess unlike the UK, there's a lot less multinationals based in Australia because we're so far from everything. So a lot of the organisations are local market only. And what that means is you're doing more L&D that's tactical rather than strategic. There is still strategic L&D. That's the stuff that I really love and get my teeth into. And there's some excellent practitioners. But generally speaking, because of the distance we've got from everybody else and the time zone, we tend to be more local market focused compared to, let's say, the UK, where, time zone wise, you're spanning across Europe and it's much easier. So what we tend to see in L&D in Australia and New Zealand is just a little bit more tactical, a little bit more local activation rather than the more strategic, grand, multinational plans. And that does have a knock-on effect. It means that we're not really innovating in the strategic areas. We're doing more of the kind of day-to-day stuff. And that's certainly what, if you were to ask business owners or CEOs or CPOs, what they really expect from a good L&D department, it will be the stuff that's more tactical, the stuff that they can see, the stuff that they've expected and they've seen previously.
Interesting. So that kind of localized market creates a bit of a, would you say, like an echo chamber, or a space where innovation's quite hard to come by sometimes because of that?
Yeah, I'd say that it's it's both an opportunity and a bit of a risk. So obviously the risk is that you can go into your shell as an L&D expert, but the opportunity is massive to do some really great work. And blow people's socks off, and so just really demonstrate and showcase innovative practices, great marketing campaigns that are supporting your L&D. So I personally think there's massive headroom and massive opportunity to do much more in our market here. What about you, Mark? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Australia being a small market has its challenges for sure. We were talking today about what we think a large organisation is, and I was saying 2,000 plus, and that's generally Tom's, that's the smallest organisation I've ever been in. So I think we have different opinions on scale here, just because of the size of the market. We've got 26 million people, so just by default, our organisations have a lot less. We've got a number of really big organisations, banks and supermarkets, and government's a huge sector for us here as well. But when you sort of trickle down to that next layer, a sort of 500 to 1,000 person business, I still see as a large-ish business based on my experience. But of course, that's when you look at that against the rest of the world, they're very small.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, naturally going to impact your learning strategy a lot. Let's talk a little bit. So obviously, as I introed, the attention economy. The struggle here in the UK is real in terms of employee engagement, the level of noise and saturation that's occurring inside organizations. Much to your point, Tom, actually, when I was running the strategic marketing course yesterday, I was saying almost precisely that. Everyone's doing the same type of stuff internally, the same type of noise is occurring, emails look the same, everything sounds the same. There's such an opportunity to even just disrupt at that level, never mind what you were talking about when it comes to the learning products and learning experiences, which we'll obviously talk about a bit later. Are you guys seeing the same thing over there in terms of with your customers, these kind of smaller organizations? Are they still having difficulty with employee engagement, or is there a different dynamic your side of the pond?
I mean, I think that the battling for attention is still a huge problem. I think that, looking at some of the modern challenges we have with the workforce, right? Like this 40-second window, they're saying now. I read a book called Attention Span, which is by an academic called Gloria Mark, and saying that this 40-second observed window, and then you've got 60 to 120 interruptions per day per person, right? And that's what is standard across knowledge workers at least. So then you're getting these toggles between applications, and I see it in myself, toggling between different applications during the day, and suddenly finding yourself opening your email up and you think, well, how did I get here? And then it takes you that little bit of time to get back to the task you're on. I think we all feel this, right? Like,
I thought that was just my mum brain. I'm relieved to hear this.
No, I'm always like, how did I get here? And you hear it a lot with developers and coders. They say it takes like half an hour to get back into the deep work when they're interrupted, and that was always a big reason why we encouraged our development team to work from home, because they just get into that flow state and they weren't getting those office interruptions and bits like that. But now I think that's all digital noise now, especially for remote workers. We use Slack, and it pings up, and then you feel like you've got this pending task you've got to get hold of, and then suddenly you've got off into your emails and you open the link, and then you're back on the task you're on. And just thinking about how many times that happens per day, I think that's it, like 1,200 times a day people are toggling between apps and websites. I mean, it's incredible. I'll be embarrassed if I tracked how many times I toggled, I think, but I think I'm probably up there as well,
Yeah.
How do we get anything done?
Yeah, but do you remember, I remember I started my career, as I said, in FMCG, and I remember working in kind of shopper environments, right, where we used to talk about how much noise does a shopper see when they walk into a supermarket, so whether they're in Tesco or whatever. And I think it's now true of our workplaces. There's so much noise, there's so many messages. Forget the fact that in a larger organization, or even a medium-sized organization, you've got so many competing agendas and functions and people trying to talk about stuff. But then on top of that, there's just all the noise of their life. So much, like, you build your own tech stack nowadays. You not just have a tech stack at work, you have your own personal tech stack that you use to navigate your world, and your own social media that's feeding you constant news and updates, and probably a lot of crap in there as well. But all that takes your attention away from whatever it is you're meant to do. There's my favourite Venn diagram, and actually someone did say to me once, "What's a Venn diagram?" So just so no one has to ask, two interlocking circles, right? And essentially, if you imagine one circle is all the things that the business cares about and wants you to care about, like, I don't know, performance, revenue, doing a great result. And then you've got stuff that you're interested in, like, I don't know, being the best hairdresser or baker, or loving my dog and my wife and my husband and whatever. And then the little slither in between is stuff where it interlocks. So stuff where the stuff that you're interested in is also the stuff that the organization is in. Unfortunately, that's not many things. So, because that's things like getting my expenses quickly. Company's on board, we're on board with that. But then it's not generally things like learning. It's not things like development in general. So you've got to think for stuff that people aren't interested in, but you need them to be good at. How do you create those experiences and that impact and that disruption for them?
Yeah. I mean, look, I've never met anyone with a favorite Venn diagram, but I have to concur if I was going to have one.
It's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's pretty good.
Yeah, because I do something similar with my clients, and this is why we do persona work. Like, it's spoken like a true marketer, Tom, because you cannot relate to people by communicating to them the things that are important to you. And so that's what often happens, and what I see a lot in L&D is, well, we have these agendas and they're mandated from the business, and so they communicate that. But what you need to do is translate it into their terms and make it something that's a little bit more relevant to them. So things like a value proposition canvas, which I'm a massive fan of. It's actually for like business positioning, but I use it a lot internally in terms of that product and brand positioning for a learning brand as well. So what would you guys say as well if we're talking about interruptions? I've noticed this. So I use Claude, I use Cowork. I've got it running tasks for me in the background whilst I do other thinking work. What I've found is my brain is fried at the end of the day because I'm multitasking even more, and I'm having to use a level of critical thinking that maybe I wouldn't have to execute if I was writing my own things or doing my own stuff, because I've done it. So I have a level of confidence, whereas I have to have a critical eye on these things, but also manage all the bits that Claude is tinkering around with in the background. That's made life even more noisy for me somehow. I don't know if you guys are using AI, or if you're finding that it's quiet in things, or if that's had any impact on you.
No, I said this the other day. Ideally, you think the focus on AI was going to make our lives, give us more time to do the things that we want to do, right? But in fact, I think it's just put more pressure on us to make more output and do more things. Whereas, so the expectation on yourself has changed. I think I expect myself to get more done during the day, right? Because as you said, you can have things running in the background, or you can just get through so much more volume. Like upload a bunch of data and have the themes pulled out. That was a 3-hour task. Or we use AI in our tool, and it used to take us an hour to write a question, an explanation, and quality answers. And now it takes it's almost instantaneous. And then there's a little bit of work to sort of go through and, as you said, check over it and make sure it's okay and tinker with it. So we're saying around 10 minutes for a question now. So it's a 50-minute saving. Huge saving. So I think then you expect yourself to put that somewhere else and allocate that work. And I think that's I think that sort of reinforces the challenge we're all facing.
I reckon it's not the same, but I reckon when people introduced personal computers and word processing, it's the same thing. This is going to speed up your life and whatever. But the adoption curve and people getting used to it and it being ingrained would have slowed people up massively. And we are in the middle of that, right? We're all trying to wrestle with it. Broadly, we're trying to find the same solutions. But it is exhausting. It's regularly I reflect on the fact that I never wanted a career in IT, but you can't escape it now. We're all essentially on a career in IT, and we're all trying to go as fast as we can to adopt as quickly as we can within reason. So, it's hugely exhausting. Humans can't keep up.
Yeah, I think I read something similar around the invention of the vacuum cleaner. So when the vacuum cleaner was invented, the expectation of cleaner houses just became the norm. So whereas before a little bit of dirt or whatnot on the floor was kind of expected in most people's houses, and because you were sweeping it with a pan and brush and you couldn't get it all, and then this sort of amazing contraption was invented which made it quicker, but then the expectation just gets raised across society that here's where we're at. So I kind of feel like we're in there. Like the AI is the vacuum cleaner at the moment. So that's where I think we're at.
Yeah. It changes the nature of the work, doesn't it? And I begin to think as well, if we're talking about the frazzling and fraying of attention spans and this advent of AI and how quickly and rapidly it's been adopted. You were just talking there, Mark, you've gone from an hour to 10 minutes. That instant gratification, that comes back, if we're talking about dopamine hits in the reward centers in people's brains, which you'll know a lot more than me about, given what your business does and the products that you sell. Is this a new problem, though, right? It's even a more short attention span than ever, sure, arguably. But is this something that is new?
I think we've always been battling for attention. Before it was just, you're on the way to work and you're getting the tube or the train and there's advertising messages and things are still hitting your brain and taking up that space for attention. But I think once you got to the office and you could sit and do flow work, I think that potentially there was a lot more time for your brain to take a break, and even doing rote tasks. Now people are watching TV and then looking at their phone, or even gaming and having Twitch running and all these activities that, you used to do without any form of technology, helping it out. That's, you double screening now, and there's just this expectation where it's hard for us to, give our brains a break. And I really think that the expectation of a learner to sit down for a 35 to 45 minute articulate module, click next compliance training stuff is unrealistic now. And, in the world we're living in, and I'm still seeing that regularly dished out from learning and development teams. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm currently playing Mario Kart and watching MasterChef while we do this. So, yeah, I'm living it at the moment. But no, it's true. It's. I think it's the democratization of media, and what I mean by that is everyone's an author and everyone's a consumer, and so there's so much more volume out there. And also, I wonder if your listeners resonate with this, but if you're in a corporate environment, the pressure to work on your social media in some respect, even if it's just LinkedIn, post something about something, is quite high. It was never there before, obviously, because you only did stuff when you wanted a job. You put your resume on because you want a job. You didn't just randomly start writing Substacks or the equivalent back then because you fancied it. So I do think there's a massive increase in this noise. But I don't think the solutions have changed a great deal. If we take it back to L&D, how many times do L&D departments really think about the user? How many times do they take an aspirational approach and think, what do people really want? How do I get to that? Instead, what we do a lot of times is we come, and you mentioned it earlier, you come along with this product-led approach, which goes, I've got a product here, you're all going to want it, and if you don't, we'll mandate it, and that will kill it straight away. It's a crazy approach, but that is true of a lot of L&D folk. There are some wonderful people out there, and there's some excellent pioneers. But I think as an industry, we can all get better at really taking a marketing approach.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of navel-gazing in our industry. I think there's a lot of talk about change, but not a lot of actual shift in behavior in terms of we're very obstinate and we're very stuck in our ways, I think. And of course, there's a lot of other things that are playing a role in that in terms of the organizational dynamics and how we interact with stakeholders and decision makers and the impact that has on our value perception overall. But I do think it is for us as L&D to own that and take the initiative to start to shift it, because the business doesn't really understand the problem. And so it's for us to kind of start to fix. So if we're talking about frazzled capability for attention, right? We don't have a lot of attention. I couldn't agree more. You can't expect people to go find some learning module that they might be interested in and then spend 35 minutes on this thing that they don't want to do. Let's be honest. So let's talk a little bit about microlearning. Mark, I know that that's what your business specializes in. You alluded to a lot of behavioral science stuff around competitions and leaderboards and things like that. I'd be interested to understand what led you to build on that notion and that idea, and how you see that impacting employees.
Yeah, we kind of fell into it. I mean, I'm not from a learning background, so I'm just going to put my hand up right now and put that out there that we kind of fell into the industry. Initially, we built a tool initially in our V1, which was around the digital skills gap, and this was back in 2015. And I came from agency, mind you, so I was in a digital agency, so we spent a lot of time educating our customers on, the coding process and the wireframes and signing off on designs and why it's important to get the design signed off before we go to coding, and why now going backwards and adding features is going to cost more money, and how does that then get on a server and all the rest of it. So we had that sort of background, and then our first product was actually aimed around trying to educate people around the process for agencies to use with their customers, and it was an absolute flop. We did not canvass the market well at all. But from that, we found that on that V1 that people were interested in a quiz-based model where if we could quiz people and identify gaps in their knowledge, they'd be more receptive to then potentially use this product that we'd built. And so we've kind of fell into the idea of this quiz-first model, and it kind of made sense for us because we did a whole bunch of interviews with L&D folk, and they all said that a lot of people just click next as fast as they can and got to the quiz, or they got their EA to do the quiz, and the quiz is always poorly written and all the rest. Click next learning, right? We've all experienced this, and I myself have as well. And so, that's what kind of led us into this idea of quizzing first, and then, having people read an explanation, and then we use spaced repetition to send the question back to repeat the information on a cycle, which for us was an idea that was used in flashcards in the development world, but we found poorly used across the rest of learning, which is, I guess, shocking to us coming from this, outside world and going, well, no one measured anything. So the first question we'd ask is, what measurement, what's the metric you have for this? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, what's the metric? Oh, well, we do happy sheets. And I'm like, what's a happy sheet? My brain was exploding. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean they put a smiley face? Yeah, literally they mark which of the faces. There's a semi-smile, and there's a smiley, and there's a frown, and they talk about the Mentos and the coffee and what they had for lunch. And you think, wow, okay. So that was the real shock for us. So that kind of gave us a bit of insight into potentially how we could do something a little bit different. And coming from, a digital background, and Lockie, my business partner, and I are both gamers. So, and funny Tom mentioned this, we were big in Mario Kart, and in fact our scoring has a banding system where, like Mario Kart, it tries to keep everyone kind of in the middle a little bit rather than allowing a huge spread. If you play Mario Kart, you might remember that if you're the fastest kart, you're speed limited and you go a little bit slower. But if you're coming 8th, your kart goes a lot faster. So it actually kind of draws all of the competitors into a sort of a more of a level playing field. So we actually adopted a few of those things into the system. But our gaming background really helped us think about the dopamine hits and giving people small rewards and leveling up and the badges and the gamification elements, because the Xboxes and the PlayStation sort of game houses do that so well. And we thought we'd try and bring a little bit of that into the learning environment. And there was always a little bit of pushback initially from some more traditional organisations, and I think there still is. I think we still get a little bit of sort of resistance, and I think you made a great point about that's not always L&D's fault, right? That is the organisation not wanting to change. They've already invested. They've got a large platform already that's hooked into their accounting system, and they've bought the learning package, and it's a 5-year deal, and we're stuck with this, and there's no more budget. So that's something we are also challenged with, being on the provider side. So that's kind of a little bit of background about how we got to where we are.
Yeah, and Tom, you implemented it, haven't you? So, talk to me about that. Obviously, your tenure in L&D, you've likely seen multiple platforms, multiple systems, multiple implementations, more content than you can shake a stick at. Did this approach have a different impact?
Yeah, look, not all micro learning is created equal, I would say, and I've used Yano a couple of times, and it pains me to compliment them because he's on the call, and but it is
just give him that $5 later.
Not in Aussie dollars, at least 10. But there's so
£5, correct? Yeah. That's worth 50 Australian dollars.
It's interesting, actually. You said about content, and actually, there's never a problem with content. You're always swimming in content. And the worst thing we can do is just throw a load of content into a library that no one's ever going to go into. The brilliant thing about microlearning is that it breaks it up, or good microlearning is it breaks it up. And the reason that I've used Yano a couple of times, it's a couple of recipes that I really like about them. One is that they think about the learner and they think about the disruption and what that's going to look like. They package it up using you don't have to, but they package it up typically with very everyday language. Stuff that does break the mold, stuff that isn't stuffy and isn't going to create this formal rigidity that you expect from compliance. And the reason I reference compliance, because I've always found compliance to be the real danger for L&D, because learners see compliance and then it becomes any e-learning, anything I do online is compliance. We're all tarred with that awful brush. And as you know, compliance is not about learning or development. It's about ticking a box. And so as good practitioners within development, we've got to find ways that break that. This isn't just a tick and flick. This is, and click the next button, as Mark said. This is about disruption. This is about making a connection, having an experience. Mark and I often talk about, like, what do you do to motivate the different functional teams? And I'm going to make massive sweeping generalizations now. But if it's a sales team, give them a league table, because they want to kill each other. They want to show off. Yeah. They just want to be on top. Absolutely. Yeah. They want to strut and whatever. If it's marketeers, generally give them awards. They love awards, some nice medals, some great recognition. Don't have to pitch me against other people. We all win awards, but we just need awards. And if it's finance people, league tables are a tough one because no one wants to be at the top or the bottom. They want to be somewhere in the middle, out of sight, out of mind. And I joke about those generalizations, but what we do with Yano is you try and think about that. Yes, Yano offers personalized learning brilliantly, and they can do some really cool stuff about how do you personalize those questions specific to people, and they've got some great algorithms sitting in it. But how do we disrupt? How do we at Yano, or if I'm working with Yano, how do we bring it to life in the culture, knowing what the confines are, and create that disruption, that excitement, that buzz? And I find that works with microlearning.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, it kind of alludes to what I was saying earlier about everything looks the same. And so something that feels immediately different, and it isn't this go to the platform and here's some content and here's a blended program. Like, the fact that you're not from an L&D background is likely good, in my opinion. Like, I haven't got an L&D background. I did a degree in media production and script writing. Entirely and wholly redundant. But it's allowed me to come in because, I just couldn't believe, same as you, Mark, no one's measuring anything. And, like, as a marketeer, like, well, hold on, I spend like 50 grand on an event and my CEO's on me immediately. Like, how many leads did you generate? And what is going on here? And you did that campaign and you spent £4 and I want to see 500% ROI. And then Learning's over there going, we have like a pretty good NPS score, and you just I don't understand. And it has obviously, again, if we talk about decision making at a business and C-suite level, when if we're not speaking CFO, and we're not able to connect to risk, like financial impact, performance impact, like if we can't show that the learning has had a genuine impact on the business, which most of the time we can't and don't. This is why L&D is where it is, in my opinion, where I see the open to work banners. I've seen significant restructuring over the past 18 months. I've seen jobs lost and budgets cut. And I'm not saying this is the only reason. Of course, there's instability in the economy and wider world. However, this is impacted because the business doesn't see value. Because the business still wants to invest in things that are going to help the business progress and get it to accomplish its goals and achieve its strategies, whatever. So if L&D can prove value, that's a really good starting point. One more thing I wanted to add, and then I'll pass back over to you guys. Interesting thing on the compliance bit, Tom. So I did some work with a big financial Fortune 50 company called MetLife a few years ago now. And I did quite an extensive piece of discovery with them and spoke a lot to their employees across the globe. because I had a very strong perception that was shared with yours, which is compliance is ruining it for us all. Go put compliance in ops or something, because it is like mandatory. It's not really like professional development. It is the tick box exercise. It is the butt covering. When I spoke to employees who worked in a highly regulated environment that had to do a lot of compliance as part of their job, interestingly, and this might just be because of the nature of their jobs, they didn't conflate the two. So it was very clear to them that compliance was part of the job and you just had to do it, and it was part of working at MetLife. Whereas they then had an association with the rest. So I'm not saying that what you said isn't true, because I still agree with you for the most part. But that did surprise me. And I was genuinely astonished that people were actually able to remove and separate those two, rather than just saying, okay, well, this is what it is. I think it does depend on the organization that you're in.
Maybe that's a maturity thing, potentially. I mean, it's if you want to change behavior, that's learning and development. And you want to drive a performance output, if it's not required to change anything, if it's just for information and legal requirements, that's compliance. Anyway.
Yeah, that's fair, absolutely. So let's think, if we're talking about employee engagement, right, and we're talking about this attention economy, we're approaching it in a micro-learning way with your guys' strategies, and I think that that's interesting given what we've said around the world today and our inability to focus. And it's, again, not all of it's our fault, but a lot of it is. We're all doom scrolling. I bet both of you have your phones next to you. I would, but I just forgot it. These things are constantly consuming our brains. So if we can improve the learning product and the experiences that are there, what about the marketing piece? Do you guys, again, Tom, you might have a different opinion to Mark because you've done the sales and marketing piece, but do you think that the two things need to still coexist, or if the product is good, will it be used by employees and you don't need that marketing piece so much anymore?
Oh, look, I think the marketing part is huge, and I'm going to big up Tom here. He does an amazing job internally in both companies. So we've worked together in two different roles. So his previous role, where we actually won 2 awards off that particular one.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, it was amazing. And it's the first time we actually put in for awards as a business. So yeah, we were extremely excited to get those. And we think we had 91% completion, 94% participation in that one. And it was particularly dry. It was dry content.
It was very dry.
Yeah, it was commercial.
It was desert dry. Yeah,
it was tough, But and again, it was aimed at salespeople. It was commercial acumen focus, which was particularly dry. We did heaps of video, and we did short form video. Again, it was a league table. It was a country versus country challenge. So we had Australia, we had Thailand, we had China.
Yeah, well. it was Asia Pacific. Yeah.
And so we had to convert it into different languages, and we had to make it culturally specific. So it was a really, really there was a lot of sort of moving parts in the project.
The Thai language is the hardest to translate to. That was the learning I had from working on that. Anyway.
And and this is where Tom does an amazing job internally, because I think you've got that marketing background, but you've also got the people skills where you're paving the way and getting the right people on board, and we're not having silos where this line manager didn't hear about it, so they're going to just ignore that email, and they're going to sort of sweep that sort of under the rug because they didn't get consulted on this. So why should our team get involved in that? And it happens in organisations that are siloed, and we do see that. Whereas I think Tom has an amazing ability to break those down, and that's internal marketing, right? As much as it's the communications piece that we do, where we have email campaigns and prizes and internal posters, it's also the conversations and drumming up the support and explaining, why you're doing it, what's in it for you, and giving the learner a bit of background as well, which I think is hugely important and something that not all companies get right. And I think the focus on that is often lost if you're an L&D order taker and all your job, or if you see your job as just creating the content and that's it, and pressing go and the launch and leave approach, it's not going to be a successful project. And coming from the provider side, we can only push so hard, right? We can only, email as many times and say, hey, have you thought about this? And have you thought about that? And we can do some comms, support and let us know what we can do. And if that's not part of their what they see as their scope of their job, or they're not confident in being able to execute that internally, then we're not going to get 91%. That's for sure.
No, I remember, Mark, we've talked about it, and I remember the conversation where we talked about for Yarno, or for any particular disruptive, marketing-heavy campaign, or most L&D campaigns, if you're working with a supplier, leaning into that is so important. It's not a handoff, you just go and do it. Because the company you're working with, the agency, they're not going to know anything about the context. They don't know about they don't know that Beryl's an idiot, or that Mark's not going to do anything he's meant to do because he just hates any external providers. You've got to navigate that. Yeah, classic Mark.
Poor Beryl gets it as well.
Poor Beryl, yeah.
Be less Mark.
You've got to lean into it. And to answer your question, marketing is indivisible. As a toolkit, marketing is indivisible to your L&D practice. And I would go a little bit further as well. And I'd say sales and marketing. You've got to understand the nuances of how to sell internally, and you've got to understand the nuances of how to market internally. And the more you can copy, an account manager toolkit and a brand manager toolkit into your L&D practice, the more likely you are to see success. Yeah.
If you can involve the C-suite somehow,
yeah.
And we talk about this a lot, when I've got a new customer rolling out, I say, is there a way we can get someone from the top, the top brass to jump on camera and do something? Like, we were talking about this today, Tom, over a coffee this morning. So my kids watch this BBC show called Horrible Histories. I'm not sure if you've seen it, actually, yeah. But it's fantastic and it's amazing, right? And it's one of those shows where you don't feel guilty that your kids are watching, because they're learning, right? They're learning something. But they do this little thing called a hist talk in the later series, where they do a little sort of almost like a TikTok style selfie, where the particular historical character is doing a little thing to camera, and it's got HIST-talk. So it's like a TikTok, but it's history focused. And I was just saying, Tom, imagine if we can get someone in the C-suite to do a TikTok, but if they're in risk, it could be a risk talk or something like that, where they're promoting this risk challenge. We're talking about a customer of mine who's doing a risk campaign. So this is where it came from. But getting something that's a little bit different. It's getting cut through, and having someone who's in senior management being seen to promote it. The things roll down faster when it comes from the top. So just little things like that, and getting that buy-in. But the person who's going to drive that is going to be that person internally to the company who has got to then go and have maybe it's an awkward conversation with the EA to say, hey, how can I get this person's time for half an hour and get them on camera? And I don't know, am I living in a dreamland? Probably. I don't know. I'd love to see this happen, but it's we can keep trying, and let's see. Maybe we'll get someone write in and say that they got someone to do a risk talk. So let's make that happen.
Well, and I think it's a great idea, because we're leaning in. One of the things that I think is really important with marketing is and that L&D forget about or overlook, is we talk a lot about a learning culture that moves from a push environment to a pull environment. We want people to come and find us. Great, that's cool, but then we need to go where they are. And we need to mimic the experiences that they're having outside of the corporate landscape, because that is what is building their expectations, whether they're implicit or explicit. If you're doing staunch corporate videos and no noise, gone, click out, bye. So I totally agree, but as soon as you said it, I could see every client I've worked with saying that won't get signed off, because there is this extra layer of, I guess, and it's probably frustration that's felt by L&D as well, but the corporate brand is often the external brand, which I won't have a rant about, but that annoys me to no end. Not the same audience. But internally, that creates a lot of limitation in terms of how you can visually deviate, how you can therefore differentiate, but it also creates massive constraints in terms of what you can do creatively from a marketing perspective. So again, I always say I need to know the size and shape of the box so that I can know which walls I can push a little bit and where we can go. But
Ashley,
I think it's these things. Yes, please.
No, I was going to say, is that because the organisation has, or their perception of L&D is you do that very corporate starchy version because that's what we expect of you? Or is it because they've never really been challenged, or they've never really been sold the dream of we could do things really differently? And actually, if here's the performance uplift that we're looking for, but we need to do it in a different way because we don't get cut through. And this is the story that we're telling internally to senior leaders and to C-suite so that they're on board with that. Even the starchiest, I don't know, bank, financial service, government, whatever, I still think you can move the needle a little bit. And if you start moving it, you start creating expectation for more. And that would be my counsel.
I totally agree. And what I was going to say is do pilots or, ask for forgiveness. Whoops, I didn't realize. But look
totally.
how well it did,
100%. Totally.
As I said earlier on, L&D has to move first. The business is not going to give us permission because the business doesn't see the problem. It is for us to educate, and the way to educate best is through data and storytelling and impact. So, this is what we were doing, and this is performance. We tried this one thing, which, you didn't really like, but it turns out our employees did. Woo!
One of the best things about L&D, and I say this to so many people, I'm going to share it. It doesn't matter if you get stuff wrong. You can fail fast because no one actually really cares that much. I know. Whereas if we were in sales and we go, actually we just lost a $20 million account yesterday, there'd be quite big ramifications. Equally in marketing, if we just splurged a massive campaign and didn't affect anything, we didn't increase our reach or anything, there'd be massive ramifications. In L&D, we can try stuff. We can iterate. We can move forward. It's a gift.
Yeah, because the spend isn't there. The scrutiny isn't there. The spend is on the tech primarily, and so that we're not investing in marketing, so we shouldn't be held to the same standard. I totally agree. Please take that away, listeners. That's a good one. I wanted to ask Tom as well, though, because obviously Mark had alluded to the fact that you've done quite a lot of internal marketing. I'd love to know some of the stuff that you've used that's been successful in the organizations that you've been in.
Let me try and think about specifics. I mean, I wanted to go back, actually. This is slightly more boring, but it is really important. So when we talked about performance and trying to get away from NPS or, even happy sheets, if you're doing that, then massive opportunity for you to increase. But actually, I also advocate for a guy who's in our industry called Kevin M. Yates, and he's the L&D detective. I don't know if people have heard of him, but if you Google him, he's got free resources. If you really don't know where to start in terms of looking for data in your organization and looking for how you're going to build a performance picture, that's a great place to start. I happily recommend him. He's very good, Chicagoan guy. But in terms of what I've done, I've been fortunate in that I've worked in some quite big brandy organizations. So there's almost license there to go, well, we kind of expect nice stuff. I guess the downside to that is you don't have the money to do it. Like when you've got a professional brand team and then you're presenting something internally, it's got to be good. It's got to be to a certain extent. So what I've tended to do is I've tended to try and dial up the irreverence a little bit because that's cheap and easy to do, and just make sure that it's professional enough to cut through. I also would strongly recommend something that I would heavily advocate. Getting the senior leaders on board is great, and you need to keep them. You need to give them a story that tracks where you're going and how you're getting there. But my favourite campaigns have always been the guerrilla ones, the stuff that you start with the groundswell, the folks who are really doing the job, because they have the biggest impact. And they have the biggest propensity to actually drive behaviour change because people get excited by it. They're drawn into it, think of like how aspirational Nespresso is, right? Before you even know it's coffee, you see like these bougie pictures and this artwork and you go, oh, George Clooney, wow, this is really premium. And it's clever. Think about that kind of approach. So sorry, I know you asked me what I actually do. So what I've done in the past, so when I worked at, I should probably just say where I work because then I might get in trouble. But what I've tried to do is leverage the brands that we've had. So think of big multinational FMCG, leverage those kind of supermarket brands for your learning campaigns because we've already, especially if you're working with marketing and sales, they've got an affinity with those brands already. So how can you leverage those internally to go, oh yeah, how do you, and then copy whatever the marketing campaigns are, but for your internal stuff? Because you want that relationship, you want that you want aspiration, and you want that emotional connection to what you're trying to do. You're always setting out there. That's my approach, without naming specific brands and names. Try and create that groundswell. Like Mark said, you've got to get the C-suite on board. You've got to get your exec team there. And once they've got trust in you, they can see the story that you're telling, and storytelling is really important. They see the outcome you're driving towards. They'll trust you to hand off. Just, do what you're doing. It's really good. Yeah, we're bought in. And then work with the front line.
So what I'm hearing, Tom, is I need George Clooney to do a risk talk.
Yeah, you do. Right? Yeah.
Super bougie. He's drinking an espresso.
He's taking risks.
What's that website that you can pay someone to do like a happy birthday wish or something? Maybe George is on there. I can't remember what it's called.
I doubt he is, I don't think he would be. Cameo. I think you can get Nigel Farage for not very much money, but I'm not sure he'd figure in many of my campaigns.
It's funny you mentioned that. Actually, we actually did do some cameos for a customer who's in a transport company, and we actually got some cameos done, and they wanted footballers for different states. So in Australia, there's different codes. So New South Wales is big on rugby league, and then Victoria is really big on AFL. And so and a lot of the drivers are from either an Indian or from Pakistan, so they wanted to do some cricketers for them. So we had a bit of a different mix, and to really engage people, right, making it specific to what people like, which is a great start. But until you get the footballer on to do the cameo, and they put about 400 swear words off script, it was funny.
That was
but
a different kind of risk talk.
It was very off. We did have a script that it went very off script. But anyway, it was very funny. I had to do a lot of creative editing, and the problem is, with the cameo, the little watermark moves around with your editing, and so the whole time it's just moving around the screen. Anyway, it kind of added to the flair, I think. So it got cut through. So I think I think it was effective.
Well, this is it, and especially when we do a lot of funnel-based stuff, because employees are primarily at awareness stage when it comes to L&D, at least based on my experience and my research. They don't really know the breadth and wealth of what's available to them. They don't know where to go, and they certainly haven't had the why and the what's in it for me really tackled. Before we can do any of that, and as Tom said, build that trust with audiences, we have to get their attention. And we can't do anything until we get their attention. So again, what I see a lot in L&D is we're sending out comms, and it is, here is a thing. We have a new thing. Here is a program. Go and take it. It's really cool. It's a leadership. We're proud to announce that we've gone from awareness to action. These people don't really know anything, don't trust you, don't want to buy your product, and you're sat just pushing the product over and over.
Great point.
There's a
massive
dysfunction there, right? So these things, whilst they seem uncouth and outlandish, this is the stuff that's gonna make people stop. With their really rubbish attention spans, with their 5,000 tasks running in the background, with their Teams messages and Slack and everything pinging 5,000 times, how do we interrupt? And that is, in my opinion, the crux of most of our learning campaign issues, is we're not addressing that first bit. We just want to go straight to getting people to do the stuff, and they don't understand that there is a process and a journey that people go on to get there,
It's so good you brought AIDA into this. Classic, right? And we do miss interest, and we miss attention. So sorry, you got awareness, interest, desire, and attention and action. And it is that. Yeah, I've totally messed it up. So it's interest and desire. Edit that one out. Yeah.
I won't.
I'm so glad you mentioned AIDA. That's a great point. And we do so often miss interest and desire within this, and I thought that's a really good point. And it's one to resonate on. What relationship do you have with your learners, or with the whole ecosystem? How have you driven not just awareness, because anyone can send an email which no one's going to read saying we've got a fantastic course running next week or whatever, but actually trying to drive interest and desire for it. And then you get into the really exciting territory of, rather than a course, what is it? What can you do at the point you need it to help you do a better job? Oh crap! This is brilliant! Wow, I can actually get much better. Rather than going, it's really important that you drive your development because everyone needs to get better at their job, and you can get whatever and progress. And it's great.
I thought actually for a second you were channeling David Brent with like, get their attention, the classic scene from The Office. And Tom and I spend a lot of time
Mostly
saying,
you, I think.
Well, I'll say, Tom and I spend a lot of time saying Office quotes to each other, and I think that's, if we can layer one into this conversation, I think we've had a win.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I do see this a lot where even if we have a great campaign, so let's say we do the George Clooney risk talk and we have this amazing campaign, and then when people go, because you get their attention and they're like, wow, this looks good, okay.
Yeah.
Press start. Let's begin. Slide down.
45 minutes.
Yeah.
And so again, I say this all the time, right? The product and the marketing have to align, and if you have a
100%.
crap product and really great marketing, you lose trust. If you have crap marketing and a great product, people are never going to use it. So you need both things to be coexisting. And so, that's why I really wanted to speak to you guys, because I think that this Yarno product, in terms of what you're doing, is really different. I've not come across anything that's kind of leveraging that, first of all, that quiz piece, and actually saying, well, what don't you know? We still got to get them there. We still got to build that intrigue and get them there, sure. But it isn't just serving up a load of drivel. It's actually saying, well, hold on, what can we help you with? And I think that changes the discourse with an employee really swiftly.
It's interesting you mentioned about the bad experience, right? We talk a lot in L&D about experiential learning, right? And we talk about how do you create that. But actually, if we're being really honest and holistic language, every bit of learning we do is experiential. It's just a bad experience or a good experience. And it's down to us as to how we do it. It's true. We are creating bad experiences all the time. We're creating great experiences. And what's interesting about when you first start using Yarno, and it's probably true of other micro-learning platforms that are innovative, the first thing that happens, I don't know if you remember this from the previous company you worked in, I would have people from, let's say, other countries who are very much schooled in the rote learning approach. They're not used to innovative approaches. They would contact me and go, yeah, hi Tom, I'm really excited about this whole new campaign, micro-learning, but before we do the quiz, we haven't actually had the lessons, so we're not comfortable answering the questions until we've... And I'm like, no, I get that. It's not a test. It's just fun. It's just, have some fun with it, enjoy it. And they're like, no, yeah, great, yeah. But do we get a pack or something we can read and learn before we do the test? And it's that mindset shift. And that's all around how do you market it? How do you create that? Because the expectation is, well, I'm trained to literally expect training. I'm trained to expect that rote learning, and then I get tested, and then I pass or fail.
Yeah, I mean, on the other side of the fence, I get the phone call from the manager saying, Mark, what happens if they cheat? I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, well, they're going to get the question and then they're going to go off and read the manual. I'm like, yep. Well, that's what you wanted them to do. They weren't doing it, and now they're doing the thing. So it's like there's no cheating. They're learning, and that's the other thing to point out is there's no reason you can't do that. You can pause. There's no time limit. You can go off and study and learn to your heart's content and get the question right, and that's great. That's the whole point of it. So if people are engaged and want to get the points and go up the league table, then they will go and read the manual, and that's what they weren't doing. So I was like, all right, well, so I like the mic drop.
Yeah.
What it cleverly does, though, is around demand generation and marketing, right? So, for example, when I launched Mass, there's no such thing as marketing for learning. No one does this. It's like me sat in my pants at home going, oh, God, someone needs to do this because it's ridiculous. So I've had to create a category, and so a big part of my marketing work has been around showing people they have a problem first and then focusing on the solution. So what that does very cleverly is exposes gaps in knowledge for people, which then creates a natural inclination to fill those gaps, particularly if there's a specific need and it's at a point of need. So what I wanted to just summarize, and then I want to ask you guys one more question. The one thing that we're talking a lot about here in terms of that mindset shift and stuff is we are dealing with very embedded perceptions and beliefs in our organization in terms of what L&D is, what L&D does, and whether it is useful. So this is why we have to speak to our audiences. This is why we have to do research. We need to understand that lay of the land and what is actually going on in our organizations, not just in terms of learning perceptions, but the culture. And again, would a risk talk land? This is what we need to understand, right? And so we are really battling with the bad work that we've done, and that has created and established a brand, whether we've owned it or not, of a lack of perceived value. I think there's a massive value gap in L&D. One last question I wanted to ask you guys is, we're talking a lot about engagement, mindset. What is one thing that both of you, and I'll ask you separately, Mark, I'll come to you first, about how teams approach engagement? What would you change in terms of what we're doing now and what we could do differently?
One thing? Okay. I am a big fan of humor, and not to say I'm humorous, but in using humor to get that engagement and in all forms of the process. So from the early stages of driving the demand for doing the learning, and then in the learning itself. So I would love to see more customers and more L&D departments use humor as a way to cut through, not at the expense of the learning itself, of course, and it's got to be done in a tactful way. But I think just trying as much as we can to get that extra cut through in learning across the board.
Yeah. Look, I love this podcast. I love that you focus on marketing for L&D. I think that's brilliant. I would suggest a couple of things. One, think like an innovator and plan like a marketeer. Understand your perception as a team or as an individual in L&D in that business, and what people expect from you, and if you need to, disrupt it. And always start with a blank sheet. Never start with what you did before, because that is the problem with L&D.
Yeah.
I like Tom's better.
It is broke. We need to fix it, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, gents, honestly, this has been an awesome conversation. We have, I could chat to you guys for ages, as we did the first time. Mark, Tom, I will put links to your LinkedIn platforms, Jarno's website, and also, Tom, your podcast as well. I'll put all of that in the show notes. If you guys want to reach out to Mark or Tom and pick up the conversation with them, please do. Again, thank you for joining me at such an uncivil hour. I appreciate it. And thanks again. Hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Ashley.
Bye. Thanks, Ashley.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.